Hello and welcome to another episode of the Mark Moss Show, where we're always talking about the decentralized revolution. We're talking about the way the world is changing. And of course, you know this, you see it, you feel it. You're not exactly sure why, what's going on, and more importantly, where we're going. But don't worry, I got your back. That's what we talk about each and every week. Of course, we're always looking at it through the lens of politics, finance, and technology. It's the convergence of those three things that help bring context to what the heck is going on. And we have a big show today to talk about, and we are talking about World War III. World War III heating up, China's bold moves, and how potentially World War III is closer than we think. And it's really about the G20, the group of the 20 largest countries. Now, we're going to cover a lot. We're going to talk about this G20 dance, the power plays that are happening, the trade balance and the trade power plays that are being reshuffled. We're going to look at some case studies like what happened in Sri Lanka and what's happening in China. We're going to look at the tit for tat already going on in this war. And then we'll look at some of the economic dynamics and opportunities that are available. Now, I've been very vocal about this for a couple of years now at this point. And I do want to just say, if you're just new to the content, you're just tuning in, when I talk about World War III, I believe that wars of the future, wars of today, are fought over information and money, right? And so the days of the hot wars are coming to an end. And so we know this, we see it, we feel it, right? You notice that we have this propaganda war, this information war being waged against us all the time. You can't even turn on the TV anymore without having propaganda shoved down your throat. You know, cultural axioms are being fed into every little narrative and every piece of content you're absorbing from mainstream. And so you already know this. So, you know, who do we even believe on what's going on in Ukraine or in Taiwan or with the Biden administration or with the Trump, whatever, his 70 indictments that he has or whatever. And like, who even knows the truth? Because there's this constant psychological war going on. I had Dr. Robert Malone on the show. It was a great episode. We talked about the 5th generation of warfare. If you haven't watched that, go back onto the podcast and just search Mark Moss, Dr. Robert Malone, or go onto YouTube and you can watch that and listen to it as well. But we talked about this 5th generation of warfare and how warfare has changed. So when we talk about this World War III, you have to understand these 5 generations of warfare. I'll just walk you through it super quick. So first generation of warfare was like mano a mano, like me and you, let's go, let's throw down, right? We're cavemen or whatever, like let's just go for it. The second generation of warfare became much more organized. This is where we had troops. We had battle plans, and we would wage war against each other. Think of the Egyptian armies, think about the Roman armies, things like that, potentially even the medieval times. Then the third level of warfare really came when we became industrialized. So now we have tanks and carriers and jets and cannons and machine guns and all these types of things. And that was really this third generation of warfare. It's just really like World War I, World War II. It's when that really started taking off. Then we went into the 4th generation of warfare, and this is where everything started to change. Now, the information war, the propaganda, et cetera, I mean, that had been around for probably as long as we know. Humans have been trying to manipulate other people. I would imagine, I haven't done the research, I would imagine, in the Roman Empire, there was probably lots of propaganda. They don't know who to believe, things like that. But we saw it really escalate into World War I. And then, of course, continue to escalate from there, where literally at points, planes were flying and just dropping out flyers, trying to get the information, this propaganda to people. But what really changed, this radical shift, was in the 4th generation of warfare, which is really shifted from these large industrial armies into more guerrilla warfare. And we saw this really in Vietnam, and that was probably the turning point of this. And so now you had this big 3rd generational warfare industrial army, like the United States, in a country like Vietnam, and finding that they are in the 3rd generation when Vietnam's in the 4th generation, meaning that they kind of started this guerrilla warfare where you'd have instead of these giant armies arriving head to head on the battlefield to duke it out, you have this one army showing up, and where's the other competing army? Well, they're in small little groups that are constantly attacking from all different angles. And it was very difficult to win that war, and as a matter of fact, the U.S. didn't. We finally left kind of tail tucked between our legs. One interesting parallel in that, I don't want to dive down this rabbit hole too much, but it's the difference of there's a book written by Simon Sinek called The Infinite Game. And it's the difference of playing an infinite game versus a finite game. And so it's an awesome read. You should definitely read the book. But it highlights this war in Vietnam where the Vietnamese specifically were playing an infinite game. It was their land, and they were not going anywhere, and they would die before they left. They were playing an infinite game. Their goal was not to lose the game, where the U.S. went there to win it, thinking it was the finite game, and there was a mismatch. You can see the same thing happen in Afghanistan. As a matter of fact, when the U.S. attacked Iraq and the whole Middle East thing started, the Taliban said, "We will wait you out." And they did. 20 years later, we left tail tucked between our legs. And so this fourth generation of warfare was really the guerrilla warfare, which then led into this terrorism war, where we have all these independent cells. They're not meeting us on the battlefield. We don't even know who they are. And there's no head to go cut off. There's no general. There's no president. All these cells are fighting independently, but on a shared ideology. Now, it's important to understand that the United States, the largest military in the world, has never won a war since we've gone into the fourth generation of warfare. And now we're in this fifth generation of warfare, as we talked about with Dr. Malone. If you want to go back and read that, again, I or listen to it, I recommend it. But that is a psychological warfare where you feel it, you see it, you feel it, you know it's there, but you don't know who it's coming from. You don't know where it's coming from. You don't know who it's coming from, right? And that's this psychological, this information war. So that's sort of like this World War III scenario that we're in. And we can really see it started picking up steam during the Trump administration when they started kind of going tit for tat and putting economic sanctions. So it became an economic war with China. All right, so we started going tit for tat on there, and so that's kind of where we'll pick up this story. But what we can see is that the G20, which is the largest 20 countries in the world, just had this big meeting in the last week. They were over in New Delhi, over in India, and you basically had all the leaders of these 20 countries, mostly Western leaders, that were showing up in this meeting, and they were advocating for new trade routes that would bypass China. Now, this is in direct competition, directly challenging what China's been working on for decades called the Belt and Road Initiative. So China's been working with all these countries, trying to connect them to build like this new Silk Road, right? The old Silk Road was the old trade routes, and they want to build new trade routes. And now the G20, specifically the United States, is going there and saying, hey, hang on. Forget China, come with us. We'll give you new trade routes. And so now we can see this war. This economic war is accelerating at a rapid rate. Instead of being cooperative, instead of working together, now it's a competition. Now, the U.S. wants to do this, as I said, to bypass China. We can see global leaders voice their support for a new ship, new rail, and digital corridors that would connect India to the Middle East and Europe. Like I said, specifically to counter this. Now, under this plan that Biden put forth at the G20, it includes the European Union, it includes France, it includes Italy, it includes Germany, obviously the West, right? And really they want to break it into two separate routes, an eastern corridor that would link India to the Gulf of Arab states, and a northern corridor that would connect the Gulf states over to Europe. And then that would allow that all the goods and services would transit through the UAE, through Saudi Arabia, through Jordan, Israel, and Europe. It would also enable electricity, digital connectivity, as well as pipes for clean hydrogen export. Now, it's interesting because I thought per the BRICS nations summit that we had recently, I think I talked about, it looked like Saudi Arabia and some of these countries wanted to go with Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa in the BRICS. But now India held this, and Saudi Arabia is talking about joining this other one. So which one is it going to be? Well, that's the war. That's what we're going to dig into. But one way that you can kind of isolate yourself from this war is to just get out of this altogether and control your own fate by kind of controlling your own money. It's one reason why I've been talking a lot about my friend Dutch Mendenhall. I had him on the show. He's the co-founder and CEO of Rad Diversified and the president of the Alternative Investment Association. And he just wrote this new book called Money Shackles. And the money shackles are what he calls like these ideas that hold us back. Ideas that we learn, like go to school, get a good job, save for retirement, take on a bunch of debt, things like that just don't seem to work anymore. And so he wrote a book to kind of address these things, Money Shackles, and it gives you his strategies to use debt to your advantage and to tap into the lucrative alternative investment vehicles. If you want to redefine your American dream, then you should definitely check out this book, Money Shackles. He says that the old American dream is dying fast. I think he's right. And you can get ready to redefine the American dream with the book Money Shackles. Go to therad.com. That's THERAD.com to break free from your money shackles. Visit therad.com. What we do know is that the Chinese President Xi Jinping, he didn't go. Now, of course, China is in one of the 20 largest countries, but he decided to go, which I thought was pretty interesting. It was sort of like a snub. He was just like, forget you guys. I'm done with you guys. And they just had the BRICS conference. And what was interesting is some of his comments there, he said that he wanted the BRICS alliance to rival, to challenge the G7, the top 7 countries, which are mostly all the Western countries. And so the language again, right? It's not cooperative. It's not collaborative. It's coercive. He didn't say, hey, we should work to be good trading partners. He didn't say that we should work to each specialize in what we're good at. He didn't say that we should open up trade lines so we can sell more of our goods to them. No. He said, no. We should rival. We should challenge them. And so I think that's a big thing. And I think him not showing up to the G20 is another piece of that. He's basically saying, look, we don't need you. We're done with you. We're on our own. And so, of course, as I said, President Biden went and pitched the world to basically say, look, we can be better than China. We can work with you better. We can help you build these things. We can help fund all these things. And I think part of it is, well, the big thing is it's the competition. The U.S. does not want China to take this lead. And they should have probably thought about this 10 years ago. Maybe better late than never, we'll see. However, there's a big piece that Washington is missing that I want to talk about. But before we get into that, I mean, basically what we're seeing is that these messages that they're going over with are messages of, hey, we'll give you lots of money. And that's basically what it is, trying to buy votes, if you will. The White House is seeking $3.3 billion from Congress to complement earlier steps by the U.S. and its allies to raise $600 billion by 2027 in order to build this partnership for the global infrastructure and investment, which is, again, like I said, this alternative to the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, the IMF forecasts that the Middle East, Central Asia, and developing countries in Asia and Africa could build up GDP by as much as 5% growth, which is a lot faster than what they've been doing. And it's what the West really needs. It's what the U.S. needs. It's what Western Europe needs. We need to get that growth up. I was going to say, if there's any hope of growing out of our debt levels, that's just probably still not going to happen. But really, we're at this stage, as I'm calling it, the decentralization stage, the deglobalization stage, and we're seeing this fracture. And again, we look at it through the lens of politics, finance, and technology. And if you look at the finance, it's easy to see that the monetary system is being completely fractured. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said on Thursday at the summit that there is real risk of fragmentation. So we have another thing that happened at the BRICS conference is they urged each of these member nations to start doing trade in their own currencies. This is the fragmentation that he's talking about. And so they're trying to hold the ship together, if you will, trying to hold it together with some duct tape, probably. Like I said, probably they should have done this about 10 years ago, but maybe better late than never. But they're hoping if they could persuade some of these fast-growing economies in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, if they can persuade them to join, if they could show them that, hey, there's another path, we have more money, we can help you out with this new Belt and Road Initiative, maybe that will bring them over. We'll see. The problem that I see, though, is that, unfortunately, the U.S. has led with a very coercive frame of mind versus a cooperative, a collaborative frame of mind. Now, this has changed. I believe that America led the world. It went to American exceptionalism because we led by example. So, in World War I, in World War II, the United States blew up. We became, this economic powerhouse because we had creativity, we had inventions, we had industry, we had manufacturing. We led the world in supplies. We showed the world that we could bring people out of poverty. We had the most diversity. We had people coming from all over the world to work here. And we were the shining example on the hill. And other nations wanted to be like that, which is why so many people came here. But unfortunately today, now the United States is in this position where all they want to do is coerce other nations to bend to their will. Hey, do it like I say, or you get nothing from me. And they've sort of turned into something like that. And the problem is that, the saying of, you can't hold a man down without staying down with him, or you can't wrestle with a pig in the dirt without getting dirty. And so in this environment, when you get into this sort of like protectionist type stage the United States is in, trying to coerce everybody to do your bidding, when there's somebody else saying, hey, well, we'll give you the same things with no strings attached, which one do you think they're going to go for? When you're telling nations like Muslim nations like Saudi Arabia, for example, that you have to have LGBTQ, you have to allow men to turn into women, you have to allow kids to transition their sex, like they're not going for that. They're just not going to do it. And so you can offer them, you could bribe them with money, you can coerce them, you could tell them you'll bomb their countries, but when you got China or any other nation for that matter saying, hey, well, we'll give you the same things and we're not going to make you do those things you don't want to do, and we'll even protect you from the big bully, what do you think they're going to choose? People are always going to choose in their own self-interest. They don't want to be coerced. It just doesn't work. Now, some of the things that we're seeing, though, out of this meeting that came out, again, it was in India, which is interesting because, again, India is one of the big players in the BRICS nations. It's the I in the BRICS. However, India is also competing against China, right? We saw this week Apple announced that, China announced that the leaders can no longer use iPhones, security concerns, whatever. Apple stock tumbled because of that. So we know that Apple is trying to move production of the iPhones as fast as possible over into India. So India is competing for China for the jobs. India also competes against China for commodities such as oil and things like that, food, things like that. And so which one do they want to go with? India doesn't really compete against the United States. The United States is back to this collaborative situation where, hey, Apple can hire India to build the iPhones, things like that. And now, when we look at India, it's important to kind of understand some of the policies that they have in place. So, for example, one of the things that the G20 talked about when they were there was clarifying rules around cryptocurrencies. The G20 all want to be on the same page when it comes to this, which isn't all good in my opinion. As a matter of fact, I would like to see less collaboration in some of these policies so we could sort of see how this all plays out. For example, we know the G20 met about a year ago and they all agreed to put in a health passport system. Okay, well, I'm not a fan of that. We saw at this meeting that the G20 met together and they all decided that they will all build the infrastructure for a digital ID program and for central bank digital currencies. I don't like either of those either. I would like that if one of these countries decided to put these types of dystopian, authoritarian technologies in place, I would have the ability to move to another country that didn't have them. So I'm not super happy to see these G20 coming together to do this, but it is interesting. We do have to pay attention to what's going on here. And so they talked about regulating cryptocurrencies. They talked about a whole lot of other things. But one of the things that I saw that was pretty interesting is they said that they didn't want to regulate cryptocurrencies out of place. What they did want to do is they did want to provide broad recommendations that countries could implement. They didn't want them to outright ban them. But here's what I thought was really interesting. They said that they should institute sound monetary policies to ensure that citizens don't begin to prefer crypto over fiat currencies in the long run. Let's break that down for a second. So, humans act in our own self-interest. Humans are very simple. We really work on two main things, right? We move towards pleasure and we move away from pain. That's it. So, we move in our interest. I want to move away from pain. So when the pain gets high enough, I'm forced to act. Now, some of us have different tolerances of pain. You probably have a friend or somebody that you know maybe got caught up in drugs or drinking, and you know they need rehab, but they don't know it. The pain hasn't been bad enough. They haven't hit rock bottom. And once they do, maybe they'll go get help, hopefully. And so we have to move when the pain is high enough. Now, moving away from a currency is painful. If you're on the dollar, like I am, I mean, the dollar is still pretty good. I still want to use the dollars. Now, if you're in Lebanon or you're in Turkey or you're in Argentina or Venezuela, the currency is so bad, the pain is so high, you'll switch. You'll go to anything else. You'll go to the dollar, you go to Bitcoin, whatever. So what they're saying here is that they should institute sound monetary policies to ensure that citizens don't begin to prefer crypto or fiat currencies. Basically, they're saying that the pain doesn't get high enough that the people would rather go to crypto over staying in the fiat. Let me give you an example. As a matter of fact, before I give you the example, I've been saying for a long time, if the governments really wanted to get rid of Bitcoin, they could in an instant. All they would have to do is take away the need for it. They would have to take away the pain points that would cause people to switch. What would they do? Well, they would stop printing money. They would live and work on a budget, and they would stop their authoritarian push and give all your freedoms back. Well, that ain't gonna happen, and so that's why Bitcoin will continue to rise. However, we can see this as a real example. So let's just take a look at Nigeria, okay? So in Nigeria, they've been using Bitcoin for a long time because their currency is no good. The Naira is no good. Why is it no good? Because they print way too much of it, which causes massive inflation, massive volatility. And so the Nigerians are like, hey, we can't use the Naira anymore because of these reasons, because the price is going up all the time, it's unstable, things like that. So we're going to start using Bitcoin. So they did. Well, now you might say, but Mark, Bitcoin's way too volatile to use as a currency. Well, it is when you compare it to the dollar. It's not when you compare it to something like the Naira or the Turkish lira or something like that. Because the pain is so high there, they would rather deal with the volatility of Bitcoin. So anyway, they're on the Bitcoin standard. And then the country of Nigeria has this great idea and says, wait a minute, the reason everybody's going to this Bitcoin thing, they're not using the Naira. Why is that? Oh, it must be because they want digital money. That's what it is. So what we should do is we should give them digital money, and they won't need to use Bitcoin. They can use our digital money. So they created a CBDC called the e-Naira. Well, they created the e-Naira. They sent it out to people, said, hey, congratulations, good luck. We have this digital currency for you now. You don't have to use Bitcoin anymore. But the people didn't want to use it. So the government's like, well, how can we get people to use it? What we'll do is we'll give them discounts. So if you use the e-Naira, we'll rebate your purchases, we'll give you discounts, whatever. So we'll incentivize you. We show you the carrot, right? Remember, pain and pleasure. So we'll show you the carrot. Well, people still didn't want to use it. So they started doing surveys, polls, they started asking people what's going on, and the people said, why would we use the e-Naira? It's the exact same thing as the regular Naira, meaning you keep printing so much of it that it continues to devalue, so why would we use that? We'd rather just stick with Bitcoin. And so this is exactly what this is saying, the statement here. They should institute sound money policies to ensure citizens don't begin to prefer crypto over fiat. As long as they're printing money, as long as they're censoring transactions, as long as they're telling you what you can and can't do with your money, people are going to want to leave. So I would love to see them live this out. It's pretty interesting they put that in there. I highly doubt we'll see them make a big switch on that. Now, let's look at some of this tit for tat in this war that we're in this economic war that we're in right now. Like I said, it really started with the Trump administration and these tariffs that we've got on there. We had these trade wars start escalating. Then Trump kind of went after Huawei, if you remember that. There was the Chinese tech company that was kind of making inroads into the United States with their 5G towers and phones and equipment. Then even the Trump administration had a high-ranking Huawei member arrested in Canada, if you remember that. Well, things have just continued to escalate since then. As I mentioned earlier, we saw this week China decided to ban the iPhone. They're trying to supposedly bolster their domestic technology. So we'll see how that plays out. But they said that it's to protect national security and to boost reliance on homegrown technology. So, okay, you ban Huawei in the US, then that's fine. China will just ban iPhones. How you like that? Now, China does account for about 20% of Apple's revenues, but more importantly, it's where they're nearly all made, as I said. But that's being moved over to India as fast as can happen. It did affect Apple's share price. It dropped about 3.6% in the wake of that news because, like I said, China is worth so much of their production. But what else? Well, we've seen The Biden administration has then moved on to ban even more phone makers, Huawei and ZTE. He says that they're surveillance companies, and so they're banning even more. I covered on my main YouTube channel, I've talked about here on the radio and the podcast as well, that they also have now stepped up. They've escalated the war. On the YouTube channel, I called it Sent Them Back to the Dark Ages by banning their ability to get semiconductors and microchips. There's like 3 levels of microchips. The 2 most advanced ones that you need for basically anything more than like a 1980s alarm clock have been banned. And not just the microchips, but all the equipment made to manufacture, service, etc. is all gone. And so that's a big deal. Now, of course, China is trying to counter that. We'll see what they can do. They have a $41 billion package that China put together to try to support domestic production. But it could take them decades to get back up to speed. We'll see. So it's sort of like this tech Cold War, if you will, a tech Cold War, World War III on tech, but it's also this financial, this economic war. So then China turned around and they banned exports of gallium and germanium, which are two commodities that we need to build out the EV transition that we want. So you see how this is just going tit for tat, tit for tat, tit for tat. It's all good until finally, it escalates to the point that guns start going off, which I pray that we don't actually get to that point. And then we have a situation like going on with the BRICS and Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, all these things. And the big one being Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia has been sort of the oil gas station for the world, and they've always sold the oil in dollars. They've been a partner of the dollar, of the U.S. to keep that dollar having dominance in the world. But now they're selling oil to China, and they're selling oil to China in their own currency, which is sort of interesting. It's breaking the back of the dollar. We have Argentina wanting to jump over to the BRICS nations as well, except for now there's rumors of Argentina potentially going back to a dollar standard. You see, these things are going to continue to break down, continue to deglobalize. This is why I'm calling it the decentralized revolution. You're starting to see that this is not straightforward. And what I believe will continue to happen is we'll continue to break apart. We're not going to have 2 alliances. We're going to have many because everyone's looking out for their own self-interest. Wars have casualties, right? Wars have lots of casualties. As a matter of fact, we're seeing casualties in all of these nations. So, for example, President Biden put on these very restrictive, onerous sanctions against Russia in this economic war, World War III, deglobalization. And supposedly it was going to bankrupt China. He was going to crush their currency, but their currency went to new all-time highs. Russian trade has done better than ever because high gold and high oil prices are very good for nations that export gold and oil, turns out. Turns out their gold and oil didn't get impacted. As a matter of fact, they're still shipping just as much as they ever were. And so it's been very good. Now, it did hurt Americans who pay, depending on when you're looking at it, maybe twice as much for gasoline. When the price of gasoline goes up, everything goes up. Bread goes up, food goes up, clothes go up, everything goes up because it all depends on gasoline. So there's no war without victims, and we certainly have those. Now, in China, we're seeing lots of victims there as well. We can see, I saw this report came out this week, that there's estimates of the youth unemployment rate being 50%. It's amazing. Now, that number was officially crossed 20% before Beijing halted it. Well, if you don't like the news, just don't talk about it anymore. As a matter of fact, don't let anybody talk about it. And that's exactly what they did. So the unofficial estimates now say that they're nearly 50%. And it's creating this new environment that I thought was very interesting. It's called lying flat. I don't know if you've heard of this before. So this lying flat term is adopted. It was adopted by the youth who are choosing to just quit the game altogether. They don't want to participate in society anymore. They quit the rat race. And they just want to lie flat. Now, in previous decades, what would happen is, what would typically happen? Agitated youth would go to the streets, and they'd be all over the streets. They would, protest. They would potentially, cause some damage, destruction. They'd speak their mind. They'd do whatever. They'd act out, right? But because China has turned into such a police state with their hyper surveillance technology that they have, it makes acting out, it makes rebellion way much harder than it ever was. And so because of that, good job, China. You've been able to kind of squash, you've kind of been able to prevent a lot of this agitation from uprising. You've prevented a lot of these protests. So now people just stay home. They lie flat. That's what it's called. Pretty depressing, if you will. We've seen China's fertility rate has collapsed to a a stunning low of only 1.09 births per woman. And it was at 1.3 just a few years ago. Now, this is horrible news for China because in the last, 3 decades, they had what was called a one-child policy, where you could only have one child. Now, because you only have one child, most people wanted a male so that they might have someone that could provide for them when they are older. And so they have mostly a male population with no females, and they have all these old people with no young people behind them. So if you just look at the demographics, what percentages of the population we have, we can see that within about 40 years, half of China's population will be gone. They'll just die. They'll be timed out, and there's not enough young people coming up below them. Now, to make matters worse, the people that are there today, they're not having enough kids. They're over it. They're lying flat. Why would I even participate? This shows the massive amounts of pessimism that's happening in the country, and it's as Elon Musk says, it's probably the largest problem that humanity has right now. Not climate change, civilizational collapse, because there's not enough people coming. There's not enough babies being born. And so China has all kinds of problems. They have real estate market troubles, property market troubles. We heard about the Evergrande situation that was bubbling up for a long time, and that was potentially going to crash things. But there's a new thing that's bubbled up in China that I covered the other day that I think could be massive. And this is another bubble that's about to blow up in the country that I think could potentially come to our shore. And it could be the force multiplier that might throw the entire world into a global financial panic. In fact, it's such a big crisis that it could make all the other ones look small. And it's about a collapse of a shadow bank called Zhongrong International Trust. Now, Zhongrong is not a pure property developer play like Evergrande was, nor is it really a bank. It's sort of like an in-between. It's what we'd call a shadow bank. And they do have some property development activities, but they have all types of other, like what we'd call investment schemes going on as well. And so, they've been known for a long time. Their reputation's been good as a top financial group in China. But now it's been revealed, surprise, 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 that they're not what they said they were, that they've been taking assets and they've been putting them into other wealth management products. They were transferred to corporate headquarters and used for various speculations that weren't connected to any wealth management goals for the people. Now, it's sort of like FTX, the FTX crypto fraud, where they were taking customers' funds, billions of dollars of customer funds, and putting them into their own proprietary speculations, and spending sprees by the principals, buying houses in the Bahamas and things like that. Now, Zhongrong is not a transparent company. Pretty much nothing in China is. It's very lightly regulated, and so there's a complete lack of accountability. And so because of that, it's almost impossible for regulators to respond appropriately since they don't even know what's going on. Now, the Chinese authorities have established a task force to try to figure out what's going on, to try to prevent some contagion from happening, but it's already started happening. The regulators are so far behind the curve on this one. Now, Zhongrong could potentially be sitting on total losses of $500 billion. $500 billion. When taken into account with shareholder equity, wealth management products, and even direct accounts, it's a big deal. Now, the reason why I bring this up in light of this trade war that we're talking about is because it's such a big deal. There's a saying that, the saying is what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. There's another saying that what happens in China doesn't stay in China, sort of like the coronavirus. And so what they make goes to the world, to the factory of the world. And so this type of a crash wouldn't just stay in China. It would go to the rest of the world. And the question is, in this trade war, in this economic, this financial war that we're in, could President Xi and the CCP decide to just let it collapse? If that happened, the Chinese stock markets could fall. Sure, that could happen. That's bad for China. But it would be way worse for the rest of the world. And maybe, just maybe, President Xi and the CCP might actually like that. They might want economic damage to be done in the United States, in Europe, in Japan. Now, this is just one of many potential black swans or gray swans that we can see out there, and we don't know exactly how this will play out, but it's certainly something to keep your eye on. As this escalates, this is what happens, right? Like I call you a name, you push me, I punch you, you get a knife, I get a gun, right? Eventually you get a nuclear weapon. This is how wars start, and until one side comes to their senses and says, hey, you know what, we're better off just cooperating together instead of fighting against each other, which hopefully at some point adults will come back into the room and sound minds will prevail. Now, one way that I'm protecting myself from this is to get money out of the financial system, and gold is one of the best ways to do that. It's been used for 5,000 years, but it's hard to know where to get gold, especially China's faking their gold. And so I trust a company called Universal Coin and Bullion, and I trust them because Dr. Mike Fulgens, the CEO, wrote the consumer alert on gold coins for the Texas Attorney General. So I know they can be trusted. I've been working with them for a while, and not only are they trustworthy, they have great prices on gold and silver, and they have a very special offer for my listeners. You can get a very special price on a silver 1 ounce American Eagle coin with no dealer markup at just $27 each with a limit of 3. They'll even ship it to you for free, and they'll give you the gold award-winning gold investment guide. You don't want to miss out on this offer. Give them a call. Call Universal Coin and Bullion to get this $27 silver Eagle coin deal today. Plus, like I said, get great prices on any other gold and silver products that you want. Give them a call, 1-800-UCB-GOLD. Again, that's 1-800-UCB-GOLD. Tell them Mark Moss sent you, or go online to universalcoin.com/Mark Moss. You've been listening to The Mark Moss Show, covering World War III from an economic and an information standpoint. Hopefully this brings some light into what's going on and where we're going. Let me know. Hit me up on social media. And that's what I got. Thanks so much for listening.